So excited to be in the building with the one and only Dr. J. Before we get started, Dr. J, why don't you tell the people who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. J. I am an associate professor of social justice education at UMass Amherst. I just live for the people. I love my people. My work really looks at the relationship between language, race, and power. It looks at the power of Black language in particular, youth activism, youth voice, and of course, hip hop and spoken word in education. And I'm just grateful to be here as somebody who's a huge fan of your work and who you are in the world, Bobby.
So much so appreciative of sharing space. I want to start our time um grounded in, you know, kind of the foundation of your work here.
Yeah.
Uh and then use that as a launching pad, if you will,
Mhm.
into our discussion for this evening.
All right.
So folks who may not be familiar with your work will see this title. By the way, amazing title. I don't know if I've told you that. Uh,
I
this
appreciate
title right here, it made me visualize
it.
like being hungry
Yeah.
and having a taste for something
Mm,
and never seeing it on the menu.
mm, yes.
Um,
It,
and then being the analogy for where we find ourselves within our educational spaces, particularly where I'm at, K to 12. I'm in middle school.
yeah.
It takes a special breed for us to be over there, but um, in middle school, I typically find that the things that my students crave the most aren't
Mhm.
offered on the menu. Is that what you were after in this title? First of all, Black
Yeah.
appetite, white food. If you have not gotten it, get this now.
Yes.
Um, is that what you were after in the title? Because that's the first thing I went to.
100%. Like I love that hit you in that way right off the bat. Oftentimes Black culture, Black language, who we are is framed as something that is peripheral to what is standardized, what is intellectually valuable, what is truly needed for success. But my argument and what I witness in my life and lived experience is that who we are is so amazing that not only are we craving it, but the world is, right? And so
Mm,
it's the fact that we continue to institutionalize white supremacy, but we know that Black culture is constantly exploited because it has the power of mass appeal and it has transformative power in our world. So we're hungry for it, right?
mm, mhm.
Often, too often in education, when it comes to Black History Month, when it comes to diversity and equity inclusion, it's like a added appendage. Like, let's add that on. Like,
Yeah.
no, we the table, we the fire. This is where it's at. This is the power is here. So what does it look like for us to show up fully to that as opposed to begging to be at other tables or thinking that value is always somewhere else?
I think that the aspect of having value be external to us,
Yes.
that ideology, that messaging, whether we're talking beauty standards,
Yep.
whether we're talking body types
Yep.
and intelligence, language.
Yeah.
Um, I want to pause at the language piece because um, I was this is years ago now. I was in my first teaching experience in Camden, New Jersey,
Yeah.
and my school leader put on this video.
Yeah.
And I had not been familiar with your greatness up until that point. And here I see someone on the screen talking about how they are articulate.
Yes.
And you broke down three ways to speak English. If you have not seen it, I need you, not now, but after this, go to YouTube, type that in, type in Dr. J's name, and you will see it. But when we talk about language,
Yeah.
too often schools have like, when you have to like go to like a certain place and you have the coat check and you have to
Yep.
check it in before you enter into the space. It feels like there's a culture check for
Yes.
schools. You can't
Yes.
enter, you can't speak a certain like, so when you enter here, All that other stuff needs to go.
Yes.
Um, so
Yes.
talk to us about how language is policed and your work around that.
Don't get me hyped because so I told you I got something coming dropping soon that's really gonna challenge the idea of code switching in ways
Mm,
that sociolinguists, educators, educational scholars have challenged in a while. This notion that language is a powerful site of culture, of memory, of history. And what we've been socialized to believe is that Black language practices are something that need to be left at the door, right?
mm,
That who we are is fine as long as it's over there. And we've kind of bought into this logic that we cannot bring our whole selves into the room for fear of getting in the way of success. Because what happens to us is that language is used as another way to police who we are and our access to various institutions because it's associated with anti-Blackness. So for me, 3 ways to speak English is another form of saying that actually the power, the cognitive dimension of what it means to engage in Black language practices, the aesthetic brilliance and beauty of it is something that is desirable, as we could see, because people stay trying on our language practices in this world,
yeah.
but it's something that's constantly constrained in spaces of learning, in professional spaces, as not being worthy. And for reasons that are really just laden with the history of colonialism and white supremacy, like for real, for real. So I'm
Mm,
an anti-code switcher. I'm gonna just say that right here, right now. To that video, 3 ways to speak English. I don't know if you know, but a lot of people use that to legitimate code switching. It's weird. And I'm like,
mm.
something else. So I really want to push us to interrogate the logic that undergirds the promise of code switching so that we can
That's
realize how racist it is. You feel me?
that's real good. Um, let me pause real quick and ask you a quick question because you said something that I want to pause, ask you, and then come right back to this.
No problem.
Part of the work we do is putting ourselves, our thoughts, and things out there to be accepted, criticized, judged, all the things. But one part I don't think we talk about enough is when you put something out there with the intent and love and labor that it takes, and then it's used in a purpose not intended.
Mm,
So, so you just kind of alluded to that there. That wasn't the purpose of 3 ways to speak English.
right.
It was wholly different than that. Yet people took it and ran with a different direction. Maybe not by and large, but
Right.
enough to
Yeah.
give you a little pause. Talk to me
Yeah.
about like the emotional context of that, because I don't think we talk about that enough.
Yo, you ask good questions. I got to tell you, you know what's funny? The notorious GLB, Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, speaks about the way that people have misused and abused the concept of culturally relevant pedagogy. Right? Essentially, as a way, it was watered down so much. She's come back
Mm,
enough to really pour into people what it's supposed to be. It was watered down so much that people were just like, "Yeah, we'll be culturally relevant. We'll bring your culture in to switch it out for the same canonical knowledge that we value in the first place." And she was just like, this is not what I'm doing. The emotional context of realizing that people feel like 3 ways to speak English is meant to validate code switching. For me, it gives me pause, right?
mm,
In the sense that what I'm saying in the piece, if you heard it, for those of you who have heard it, is that while I was being affirmed in a particular moment for sounding articulate as I spoke white mainstream English, as Dr. April Baker Bell calls it, I was lifting up the fact that I also speak Caribbean Creolized English and I also speak Black American English. And the reality is that what it takes for me to move through those different linguistic practices is what actually makes me articulate. It's actually this code meshing, as some scholars call it, and the way that I bring together all these iterations of myself that sometimes and often transcend the skills that are needed to speak white mainstream English. And I am able to show up more fully in those language practices. You feel me? And so
yeah.
it was meant to celebrate, like this linguistic celebration, like I say in this piece, but not meant to say that I must parse out and trade off different aspects of who I am to belong in other people's rooms.
Yeah. Yeah. You, and I think to that point, there's this video. uh, that begins with a mom in a car talking to her son and says, "Son, what did you learn today?"
Mm,
And he begins to unpack how he learned that the pictures in his book are in black and white because you want to think the past is past and not sitting next to him in his first, second, and third period. And
mm.
talking about how race and racism is
Wow.
very much a part of his lived reality, but you want him to think
Yes.
it's in the past.
Yes.
He continues. Another young lady gets up and says, "I learned that I can master language like Langston, and
Hmm.
that in my creative writing courses, you will still dock me points because this isn't grammatically correct."
Right. By a
And I,
particular grammatical standard, though. Right.
yes.
Hmm.
And that was what she was trying to highlight in saying that. And I wonder, right? A child can come to us and have the dopest thought, like just the way that they weave certain things together, the creativity. And because they speak like you and I might be talking right now, or
Yeah.
because they say nah mean, or because they
Yeah.
say, whatever it is, their intelligence will be tossed aside, never viewed, and they will be pushed out, told that they don't belong before they even opt out and won't try. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say there?
100%. And so the book you talked about the book title.
Yeah.
Book title Black Appetite, White Food is inspired by Frantz Fanon's book title Black Skin, White Masks. It was one of the first times in my own intellectual history that I encountered at a very young age this notion that we are wearing these white masks, right? This is the beginning of my deepening consciousness. So this is what happens, right? We're asked to slip into these linguistic masks to perform whiteness through language or to be in proximity to white Eurocentric middle class standards so that we can be palatable, right?
Mm.
To those in power.
Hmm.
And so what you're saying is 100% absolutely right. We will then say that students are disengaged, that they have no voice, that they are speaking, we just not listening. And they are speaking
100%.
in ways that are powerfully rule governed and have require the same level of cognition as any other language practice. But because we don't value it, it's ratchet, it's ghetto, it's delinquent, it gotta go.
But but to your point, it is this academic and economic redlining where
Yes.
we will say it doesn't have value. It's
Hmm.
not something that you can live in. It's not something that you want. And then at the end of that, we'll move into that very thing that we told you doesn't have any value. Sell it for ourselves and make money off of the very thing that you've
Well,
been doing the whole time.
I'm always talking about that all day. This is the appetite. Our world is so hungry for Black culture. The way we use language, you just said, nah, I mean, like the way we use language, the way that we move through the world is just powerful. I'm trying to remember what Zora Neale Hurston said about Black language, right? Because she said something like in the mouths of Black people, like English, I don't know. It says something like I have to remember it. I'll recall it, but
Mhm.
it's just the way that we have this ornate, beautiful way of decorating language and using it powerfully, right? And
Yeah.
so there's an appetite for that, and it exists, and it can be co-opted, and it can be, we can get corporate gain and mass appeal, but in school, in professional spaces, we'll say it's not legitimate.
I think kind of about my journey. And there was a point in which I felt like if I was going to show up and be the kind of educator, to be the
Mm,
kind of teacher, leader that my students needed, then I would have never said it this way then, but looking back, I thought I needed to be palatably Black. I needed
mm,
to shave off parts of myself that were deemed offensive, where I didn't necessarily fit the mold. And so, yeah, I wore the shirt and tie, but not because I was like, "Oh, I look fly," or whatever have you, but because I thought that that was what I needed to do to present myself as, "Okay, well, now you can see me. Now you
right,
can view me."
right.
And so I'm putting on, more than a mask. It was a shell of myself in
Mm,
how I showed up.
mhm.
And I think it's important to say that because I think sometimes people see folks talking about subject matter and then automatically deem folks as like experts. They've never experienced it. I'm saying that even now, right? I am making conscious decisions to refuse
Yeah.
to not bend. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Come on, you better
Um,
preach. I do know. Now,
and I
yeah,
go
yeah, yeah.
ahead,
Go ahead.
please.
No. Go ahead, go ahead.
So for like even in the little things, so um I make conscious decisions to wear shirts that I know are unapologetically black.
Yes.
Like my shirt right now says highly educated, highly melanated.
Yes. It's the
I
act of
put that out there into the world because one, my here's where I knew it started making like just even the little things like it made conversations with my students that much more deeper. Miss
mm-hmm.
Morgan, where do you get these shirts from, and why do
Right.
you wear them? I'm so glad you asked. Let's talk about it.
Can
And
I
so
say
now we're
something?
please.
Because this is the thing about language. Language is more than words. It is a site of
Mm,
memory and history and culture. So guess what happens when we let Black language into the room? We let in
mm,
Black memory and history and culture. But we present language just like we present curriculum and education as ideologically neutral when it's not. So
mm,
when we socialize and condition students to believe that the only valuable language practice is white mainstream English, they are also being steeped in white mainstream memory, history, culture, and ideologies. It's dangerous. You feel
mm,
me? So
mm.
we're not just being so integration or the failure of integration in schools, it has meant that we are there in body, but not there in substance.
Wow.
Our
Wow.
language is our substance. It's a deep
Yeah.
part. The language that we speak across the African diaspora still holds powerful remnants of West African language structure. And so it's
Mm,
not random. It's creolized and it's rule governed, and it preserves that journey and that legacy that we've been on in a way that is a part of our identities. So
yeah.
when you keep it out of the classroom, you keep us out of the classroom in spirit. And so it's an act of violence. And so I'm telling you, I got you. I know that the next conversation, because when I drop the next thing that I'm gonna drop, we're gonna have this conversation heavy. Like this is
Yeah.
the conversation. Trust me.
Yeah. 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 I'm so excited. Sign me up. I'm
Thank
there
you. Yeah.
and copping whatever. So let's let that be out there too. I want to jump into why we titled this, what we titled it, but I want to say the story we talked about offline as kind of a kind of the backdrop for that. So
Yeah.
I told you my family is from Panama. My great aunt lived um in Brooklyn, right on Eastern Parkway. And so for
Yeah.
anybody who's familiar, Labor Day, um, there was always this parade, this
Caribbean.
celebration of every Caribbean country, and 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 as I watched folks wear this these celebratory, like I had no idea the depth of culture that was embedded in what I was watching.
Yep.
It was just a party. We were going to go in there and turn up. We were
Yeah.
going to be unapologetically who we are, wear our flags, listen to our folks. I remember, uh, one year Wyclef and the Fugees were coming by, and it was just
Yeah.
a celebration.
Mm-hmm.
So it brings me to my family lineage.
Okay.
My grandmother, she came over, when she was still young, about 18, 19 or so. But my grandfather, they moved. My grandfather was in the service. They both were from Panama, but my grandmother spoke Spanish and had to learn English after getting here.
Mm-hmm.
She still kept her native tongue. She
Mm.
still cooked with the native dishes.
Mm.
She everything that was indicative to who she was, she kept in the process of coming, which is a
Yes,
very, very hard thing to do. I have so much more
it
honor and
is.
respect for her
Mm-hmm.
knowing what I know now.
Yep.
But I want to juxtapose, and not in a bad way, right? But just the reality of it is my mother was born in Panama City. She
Mm.
came over when she was obviously still young. My my grandmother, and then they raised her, and so on and so forth. But as she was growing up, she made a conscious choice to not speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
She knew it. She was fluent to the point where I don't know Spanish. Like, I didn't inherit that, didn't get passed down to me. Now, I learned a lot because I wanted to reclaim, but for her, she made a
Mm-hmm.
conscious choice.
Right.
When I look at these two women, these two matriarchs, if you will, in my family, I look at refusal in my grandmother's life as preservation, as an act of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I want you to take us into why we titled this Freedom and We DNA Culture as Reclamation and Refusal in Education. Take us to the text. What is going on? Why do we title it that?
Take us to the text. Turn you to the passage.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so Trini to the bone right here, right? My people, Trini. So the best carnival in the world, Trinidad and Tobago, recently occurred in February, earlier this month. And there's always something called Road March. So the parade of bands is just what you were describing, all of the costumes of people who have decided to compete. So when you see the ornate carnival costumes, there are bands, they have a theme, they have a vision, and the theme and the vision is usually connected to some element of history. It's telling a story through the clothing, through the music. The parade of bands is them walking as a group across the stage. And one thing that they will do for something called Road March, which is an annual competition, is they will play the song that they're voting for, the soca song, right? That they're voting for that year as they cross the stage. So this year, the song that won is a soca artist, Mikhail Teja, and the song is called DNA. And one of the refrains in the song that set my soul on fire is tell them the freedom in we DNA. Tell them the freedom is in our DNA, right? And so if you've ever witnessed Trinidadian Carnival, there is this unapologetic expression and ethos of joy and ease and freedom, and just free up yourself is something that is said often.
Yeah.
And then when you tie that up, and he does it in the song DNA, he shows us elements of how carnival culture is rooted in emancipation of the enslaved in Trinidad. Then you start to really understand how the different elements of Trinidadian carnival are all connected to an African diasporic consciousness, right? The costumes, the music, the message, the rhythm, the steel pan, all of it. Steel pans were created out of oil bins and garbage cans, and they made music, and they became also a part of the emancipation process. All of this power and genius and beauty and rhythm is in our DNA. And so all that I'm drawing on that as a part of my own legacy and history, to think about the concept of reclamation and refusal in education. I'm inspired by the fact that in Trinidad, the actual department, the Ministry of Education in Trinidad has been intentional about incorporating carnival into the educational curriculum across the nation. And so the children are learning through the lens of their own cultural practices, the power of that history. And so I want us, this is where my work is going. We talk about culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogy. What does it mean to sustain through reclamation and through refusal in the midst of our cultural practices that we are unapologetic about? And so that's where that name comes from, and understanding that the very freedom we seek and that we dream into exists in our very DNA. I'm just so inspired by that concept.
I think about, as you were talking, this thought of it existing in our DNA. And one of the pictures that come to mind is sometimes things can lay dormant before you recognize.
Listen.
how rich, deep, um, freeing, liberating it can be. There is a consciousness that a critical consciousness, right? That I think folks are walking in um, now more than times past, because when things are out there and in front of you, when it's not, we talk a lot about folks like Trump, and we talk about the overt racism that came, or is more pronounced on
Mm,
this side of history. And I
mm,
always say, but listen, on the other side,
yeah.
it's the same monster, different teeth.
Yep.
Because while you won't say like, okay, send them back and chant things like that. What you'll do is pat me on the back, and in your hand is the knife that's doing me in,
Mm,
right? Or you'll smile about, how wonderful or how articulate
mm,
I am, but secretly you think differently, or secretly you plan different, or you keep me then for the photo op, right? So
mhm.
like, it's the same monster, different teeth.
Right.
And I think about refusal. I think about it being in our DNA in light of
Mm,
that political that context that we reside in. Now, with that, I'm thinking about our schools. I'm thinking about how we should be preparing, setting loose our kids to be able to
yeah.
unleash their genius, brilliance, and all of that onto the world. And then I have a question.
Yeah.
What will it take? I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking about the fact that over 80% of our teaching force is white women. Am I saying white women are terrible? No. I'm saying that there are cultural barriers. I'm saying that there are a lot of things that there's growing and learning and challenges there. And as a school leader who happens to be, you know, unapologetically black, I'm still I have to exist in these present systems. So while I freedom dream, I'm still battling certain things. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
It sure does. I feel you.
So for
Mhm.
folks who want and have black appetites,
Mm.
how how do we do this thing, this this resistance, this how do we free up ourselves, if you
Yeah.
will, while we are still experiencing the things that we are experiencing?
I love this question. So two things come to mind for me. The first one is that I really want us to go deeper with disentangling schooling from education.
My
As
mind.
a people, we have to understand that our Afro-Indigenous consciousness for so long has not relied on the formality of school structures to transmit knowledge, right? We have
Mhm.
to get back to understanding the power of the way that knowledge and knowledge exchange exists powerfully in communal spaces and in the very cultural practices and traditions that we probably just take for granted right now. That's why I love the concept of carnival and what it does, right? How it
Mm.
functions as a preservation of history, how it celebrates rhythm, how it insists on joy. It is preserving and transmitting something in a way that's not bound up by the four walls of schooling. And I need us
Mm.
to get there, right? This is why I care so much about hip hop education. This is why I bring in arts education. And this is why I think about spoken word and what are the ways and critical media literacy, the ways of knowing and being that already exist in the lives of our children, right?
Mm.
And so I need us to think about education as something far more expansive and broader than the limited mechanism of schooling that in its own DNA clearly is imbued with white supremacy, right?
Yeah.
Relying on those structures as the end all be all is not really making a lot of sense. At the same time,
Mm.
like you said, here we are navigating and occupying these spaces. For me, especially when we think about the teaching force and the disparities between the teaching force and the actual diverse population of students, if we truly, here's the truth. Let me just the tea. I don't even know if it's
Please.
tea anymore. A lot of the educators that we are working with do not feel safe in or trust or believe in the communities that their students come from. They don't value it. You cannot be culturally responsive and sustaining. You cannot be anti-racist. You cannot be all these wonderful words if the very fabric of where your students come from is something you don't even fundamentally value. Right? And so we got to interrogate that in real time. But for the people who are showing up and understand that the Black appetite is real, what does it mean to understand that these young people and their communities are experts over their own lives? And to use that as the building blocks of a curriculum, and to use that as a way to put them in conversation with a variety of knowledges. So school has been structured in a way. So a lot of scholars have really theorized the way that school has been structured in a way to make sure that Black and brown students in particular are filled up with knowledge that they are missing, that the dominant white-centric, Eurocentric, middle-class culture has access to, but we are empty of. So the logic of doing school and the logic of equity and the logic of saving the children has been, how do we fill them up with the right kind of language, the culture, the knowledge, which already in its premise denies the value of where they come from. If we reject that premise, then we begin with the idea that they already come filled with wisdom, knowledge, genius practices that can be affirmed and put in conversation with other forms of knowledges that they can knowledge build. Now we're building and growing. It is a paradigmatic shift. So I know people always want answers of practice. What do? I need people to shift their paradigm. You don't believe in the fundamental value of our children, your paradigm is off. You cannot affirm them because you're trying to fill them up with something else.
Bar.
Right? You feel me? So for me, that's where it starts. And for me, that's why Freedom in We DNA and just the concept of Trinity Carnival and where it's going and the way they're making sure it's integrated with education is everything. Because it is, as opposed to a denial of this complex history, it's a preservation and a turning towards it. And not just that, extending it. And I'm not saying it's perfect. Of course, there's nuance. But I'm saying that I want to invite us into valuing there's legislation being passed now to turn away from the very histories that we need to face.
Yes.
The paradigms are just all over the place.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's the way that I can answer the question. Those are the two pathways in my mind.
I think that's you said something. Well, you said a lot there, and one of the things that I hope people are sitting with is the number one export. I feel like from our communities is teachers who don't look like, or even if they do, they don't value, love, and serve the people in the communities in which they are teaching in.
Right.
They come in, collect a check, and then go back to their communities where and none of that stays.
Right.
There is no understanding of community partnerships because we don't value the community. We don't think there's strength and dignity and brilliance there. And because we are divorced from an accurate history, even in our local understandings, we tend to blame the folks who have experienced injustice for the ways that they experienced the injustice.
Mm-hmm.
We turn our nose up at folks when certain traumas reveal themselves.
Yeah.
But they didn't experience trauma by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't. That's not who. If given all the resources and opportunities in their lineage, you would find a very different trajectory.
Right.
And I feel like because of that, we tend to blame people for experiencing the very intentional, vile act of creating, quote, the hood. Like the hood is not an accident.
Mm-hmm.
Like it didn't just happen out of nowhere. It was a deliberate attempt. Yes.
Yes.
And so we're willing, to take 2 years if you're TFA to go into the hood and teach and then go somewhere else. We're willing to make all our mistakes on black and brown babies, and then as we grow in our expertise, then go teach somewhere else where we can, you know, go, with people who maybe look more like us. So here is all the training ground, and here's the
Oh,
money,
yep,
and here's all these things, but then we're going to go bounce and go take it somewhere else. So
yep.
the academic excellence leaves, the money leaves, and yet
Mhm.
we're still experiencing the educational debt. Shout out to Dr. Gloria
GLB.
Ladson Billings. Yeah. So I think about that, and then I also think about what you talked about with this banking model, right?
Yep,
That our kids come to us empty, and we deposit all the things that they need. If they don't come into us with money to spend, so to speak,
yep.
academic money to spend, that we have to give it all to them. So my question then is, with the paradigm shift, how can we help people cultivate mindsets of, I'm going to say, humility, of where they can then come in and recognize that they don't bring everything to the table, but there is so much here that they can cultivate, right? That
Yeah.
we don't have imperialist understandings of education, if that makes sense.
You know, I really believe that there is yes, there's internal work that has to be done. There's hard work, but then there's the hard work of institutional change.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it matters what we institutionalize and what we value,
Yeah.
because people could pull up to a school believing anything they want, but them policies and them norms are going to govern and hold them accountable for what the institution values.
Yeah.
So, as opposed to me starting with this notion of, if everybody could get on the same page with their heart, then we can value these children. As an institution, I ought to be bound to making sure that the policies and the norms and the values that we hold on to here hold everyone in this building accountable to the standard of equity and love and justice. So you
That's good.
can't have dress codes that are racist, right? Because you're telling me something about what you value. You can't have curriculum that refuses to represent accurate histories, because you're telling me something about what you value. And the people who come near to collect a check, they will fall in line. I'm not saying that the hard work is not necessary, but too often institutions are reinforcing the very things that we're trying to undo. And then we want everybody to just do the hard work and close your door and don't get caught. No, this is why legislation is being passed to write us out of history in schools, because they understand the institutional and political dimension of making sure that things are real.
Mm.
And
Mm.
equity can't be real if it only exists in the hearts and minds of a few people who decided, you know what? Yeah, no, that's not how it works. The
Yeah.
institution. So I believe that, as opposed to this notion that it's our work to do the emotional and psychological labor of telling everybody how much they need to, how are the institutions holding people to the standard of equity, right?
Mm.
And so for me, that is where a good bit of the work should be, and I want to see us move in that direction. It's not that I don't believe that the other work is important. It's just that I feel like I know too many educators who have to close their door and do the good work because their institution doesn't even value it. So what does that
Mm.
even mean for the sustainability, right?
Mm.
Of what it
Hmm.
is. And so I will start there. That's where I would start in terms of thinking about what it means to move the needle forward in that way.
When I think about so many different things we talk about, anti-racism, equity, justice, and all these words that become, unfortunately, cliche,
Yeah,
where people lose meaning, right? Going back to the power of language, it loses their meaning as people repeat it and don't necessarily take the context and the meaning with them.
right.
So that at least in this space, in this time that we are sharing, help folks understand what you mean when you talk about refusal and reclamation. What do those two things mean in their true essence?
So I want to draw on the work of the brilliant Eve Tuck and Wayne Yang. They have this amazing chapter called Refusing Research. They're talking about educational research, but also educational practice. In this chapter, there is an image they have from an artist, a photographer called, his name is Ken Gonzalez Day. He has an image, and it's a part of his Erased Lynching series, right? In the Erased Lynching series, he documents images of lynchings on the West Coast, mostly on the West Coast and the Southwest, lifting up the fact that most of those lynchings was of Latinx people, Asian, and Native people, like, right? Indigenous folks. But what he does in the images is he removes the body. And he does it, they lift up, as an act of refusal. Because most of the time when you look at a lynching scene, your eyes are drawn to the gruesomeness of this person of color's broken, distorted body.
Mm.
He's refusing the way that we become enamored with the brokenness of people of color. And then what you realize is that in this lynching scene, like most lynching scenes, there's a crowd of people on the ground, just like chilling, watching. There's no body there. So if you didn't know better, you would have no idea that somebody's being lynched. What it does is it draws attention to the people that's perpetrating the crime.
Mm.
And so they make connections to how we do educational research and practice and advocacy, because what we do is we will center the brokenness and these pain narratives and what they call damage-centered narratives of youth of color in particular, and we will call it a pursuit of equity and justice. What we do when we shift that lens is we put the lens on the people perpetrating the crime, the institutions of power that contextually allow for this to happen in the first place or create this kind of violence, right? And so this act of refusal is, what does it mean for me to refuse to put the gruesomeness of our people on display for your learning? What does it mean through our acts? Like you spoke about your grandmother, this act of refusal to claim that language and to refuse to assimilate into a system that rejects the fullness of who she is. So I build on and I draw on that picture of refusal to think about its power in making connections to the Trinity Carnival experience. It, for me, this unapologetic joy and expression and culture and history is an act of refusal for a people who are meant to be bloodied and broken, and instead show joy and freedom. How about that? Right?
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so shifting us into that light, when it comes to reclamation, I'm thinking about what it means for us to author our own narratives. Because when our narratives are authored by someone else, it takes on a different flavor. When we tell our own stories, when we understand our own histories, when our own languages are in our own tongues, then there is a different way that we are pictured and postured in the world. And so there's a reclamation of our narratives when we think about the power of authorship. And authorship is connected to the authority over ourselves, our bodies, our minds, our stories, our beings. And so for me, refusal and reclamation work hand in hand in our quest towards freedom. I hope that answers your question.
It does. It does powerfully. You know, we think about refusal. For my grandmother, it was a preservative. And you preserve that which you value.
Yes.
As I'm listening to you, I go back to what you said about DNA and how it made me think about things that may lie dormant, right? And
Yeah.
for me, there was a later growth in consciousness and appreciation and
Mm.
adoration for all that we bring to the table.
Right.
Um, the fact that you could give us the most the food that you didn't want and we make masterpieces out of it.
Yes, yes.
The fact that you could give us um you know the things you didn't want, we will take it, spin it, flip it, and then create something brand new out of it.
Yep.
um whether that be in our music, whether that
That's
be
steel
in,
pan.
yes,
Steel
yes,
pan
that's
made up
what I
of
was going to say.
lead.
Talk to us a little bit more about that, as a picture of resistance,
Right.
that we could be gleaning from.
So I want to say first that carnival in and of itself comes from the time where the French colonizers in Trinidad used to come with their masquerade balls towards Lent, and the enslaved Africans were not allowed to participate. And so they created their own celebration, and it came to commemorate the emancipation process, right? So there was that way of the being excluded, being refused humanity and belonging that they repurposed into their own sense of self.
Mm,
Similarly, dustbins, oil drums, things of that nature in Trinidad were used. These garbage, right? The things that other people they refused it, we reused it, we reclaimed it, we utilized it in a way that became the sound of our freedom, right? It became a way to communicate, right? And so when we talk about freedom in the DNA, so you know anything about epigenetics, then you know that in our DNA, we have preserved legacies that have the capacity for expression, but they need the context in order to truly reach its fullest potential.
mm,
So
mm,
um, you can have the genetic possibilities and makeup for a particular form of expression, and it can lay dormant until it's activated. And so
mm,
in my mind, the way that that freedom lies potentially dormant in our DNA, but when we cultivate the kind of spaces that are culturally sustaining and affirming and imbued with love and imbued with dreams and does the work that it needs to do, there's something dormant there. There's an appetite, there is a hunger, there is something ready to express and to be fully freed. And
mm,
so I see it all connected. I see it as all connected. And in Trinidadian culture, the very expressions that you see and celebrate right now comes from the same tradition of what we are able to repurpose and reuse in our own sense of reclamation.
mm, mm. I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm excited for what's to come.
Yeah.
Uh, the
Thank
the
you.
the coming projects, the coming,
Yeah.
I'm waiting. I'm setting
Yeah.
my whatever whenever that date comes, I'm gonna be there.
I appreciate it.
So so let me ask you this as we round out our time. I want to ask you for just some final thoughts as we wrap up, but also for folks who may be listening, are challenged by this, um, and I think that sometimes folks like to hide behind ignorance as a way to not get involved, not to act, not to make a mistake, or whatever have you. And I don't like give people an out. I like to push us into what the real work is. And so, if you could speak to that, right? If folks are listening and are challenged, um, paradigm and practice, what can they do? And then also connecting to you, your work, and anything like that.
Yeah. Thank you. And paradigm and practice, that's co-requisite now. That's co-requisite work, right? For me. In terms of paradigm, we live in the information age. I'm like, jump
Yeah.
in. Like
Mm,
saturate yourself with knowledge. Like the idea, I'm the kind of person, my ministry is to work with the people who show up and who've done the work and are in the throes of understand what it means to doing the work. We are living in a time where the idea that you just don't know or you just don't know how is an excuse that I can't. It's just not my ministry. It's for somebody else. And it is necessary work. It's just not for me. So
mhm,
for me, get into the conversations, right? Curate a particular area of knowledge that you're interested in, whether it's critical race theory or culturally sustaining pedagogies, or thinking deeply about a particular concept, and read and listen and learn from the people who are most marginalized, and from the people who are often, situated in what Toni Morrison calls discredited knowledges. The knowledges that we usually turn away from, turn towards them and see what you learn. Sit at the feet of wisdom that's outside of the canon, that's not legitimated by white supremacy, that's not valued in school. Sit at the feet of that knowledge and think about what Toni Morrison says moves at the margins. What's moving at the margins? Become a student of the margins and then see how you're transformed. And that's your work, because I'm a join people in the work who we trying to labor forward, but the psychological and emotional labor of trying to convince people that we're valuable, I'm off that. I'm sorry, it's not for me. So become a student of the margins, and your paradigms will shift and your practices will shift, because your practices will emerge organically out of your paradigms. And I really don't want people engaging in empty practices that don't have the substance of deep paradigmatic shifts, because then you just performing equity. And now we got random people on TV kneeling down in kente cloths. Like, that ain't it, right? We don't see some things over the year. That's the years, ain't it? We don't need people performing equity. We need you to become a student of the margins, and we need your practices to emerge out of your shifting paradigms, right? To understand and value Black and Brown youth as experts over their own lives and their own knowledge. If you don't love and value them in their communities, and to your point earlier, Bobby, it's not that there's not issues in our communities, but if you can't historically and contextually situate it so that you have a more nuanced understanding of what's going on, one that doesn't reduce them to some kind of pathology of violence, then we can't be in the same conversation, right?
Yeah.
So opt into that work, and it will lift you out of that ignorance real quick. And that's what I got for you. In terms of connecting with me, I'm on Instagram, or at Jamila_Lyiscott on Instagram. And you can check out my website, JamilaLyiscott.com. I have some amazing work coming that I'm really excited about bringing into the world, like really excited. But I got to be silent about it for now. But Freedom in We DNA, we on that right now. And I'm just so grateful, Bobby, that you gave me this opportunity.
100%. I'm so glad that you shared space with us, and man, I really hope that people glean from the gem shared this evening. So thank you. We appreciate you, and totally excited for what's to come.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.